young mother on the verge of a new beginning.
She always used to talk about her wedding. She had everything planned out.
She was gonna be living the life that she's always dreamt of having.
Violently struck down.
Not just homicide, but an act of rage.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that.
Police chase a deranged killer down a sinister path.
He was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. Someone burnt the house down.
Through a maze of twisted theories.
Maybe this was a retaliation.
It was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
Until the case takes a mind-bending turn.
He looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong."
That person never was on our radar.
Just an epic tragedy.
I was almost in disbelief.
That's just something that was entirely unexpected from the beginning.
Until we try to rule them in or rule them out, I don't know that any of us are safe.
On Sunday, August 10th, 2014, in an upper-middle-class neighborhood in Jackson, Michigan, a quiet morning is broken by a desperate phone call.
Our dispatch did receive a 911 call from a panicked individual.
911.
Yeah, I need somebody up to my house right now. My fiance, I think she's dead.
Okay, so has she been sick?
No, there's blood everywhere.
Do you know where it's coming from?
I don't know.
Okay, can you tell if she's breathing?
Not be dead. Okay.
Police race to the home just before 11 a.m., where they're greeted by the caller and 3 young girls.
He had said that the deceased body was up in a bedroom upstairs. There was 2 bedrooms that we walked past, which were bedrooms where the kids had been sleeping.
With the 3 children who lived there safely out of the house and the crime scene locked down, detectives come upon a grisly sight.
As we enter the bedroom, then we do see the body. It was slumped down between the bed and the wall. And there was quite a bit of blood. At that point, we see zip ties on her hands, and we see what appears to be several stab marks.
A zip tie was wrapped around each wrist, with another looped through it and cut, as though she'd been strapped to the bed and then cut loose.
We, at that point, determined we likely had a homicide.
The police talk to Eric Wolf, who placed the 911 call. He tells them the victim is his fiancée, 28-year-old Frances Craig. He also makes a startling admission.
He said that he had worked all night, so when he came home, after finding Franny in the condition she was in, he then went downstairs and slept on the recliner chair. For whatever reason, he did not call 911 until a couple hours later in the morning.
Frances's 2 daughters and Eric's little girl were all in the house at the time. While Eric slept, his 10-year-old child walked into a horrifying scene.
Eric's daughter, Lexi, went into the bedroom and clearly could tell that something was amiss. She even touched her and could tell that she was not moving. I think she might even have described her as a little cold.
Lexi went downstairs and woke up her father. And that's when he finally called 911.
We all felt that a normal, average individual would, at the bare minimum, make sure their fiancé, the person they're about to get married to and spend the rest of their life with, is okay.
Eric's decision to walk away from the murder scene is a red flag for investigators. And so is his casual demeanor.
When Eric was interviewed by one of the other detectives at the scene initially, the detective said he didn't seem too concerned, didn't seem too upset about what had happened.
Detectives plan to grill Eric about his suspicious behavior. But first, they need to finish processing the crime scene.
There was approximately 90 stab wounds, and they were in a very aggressive manner.
It was overkill. Not just committing a homicide, but an act of rage where it's over the top.
The rule of thumb is on a situation where there's multiple, and I'm talking more than a dozen stab wounds, it's usually a crime of passion. So at that point, you typically look at somebody close to the victim.
Investigators sift through the bloody mess for clues. There's no sign of a murder weapon, but plenty of signs of conflict.
The crime lab, which is the CSI people, they responded to the scene. They were there for multiple hours, collecting a ton of evidence.
While the forensics team works the scene inside. Shocked friends and family have gathered outside the house.
I didn't believe her. I thought it was a lie. It's not real. It didn't happen.
I had no idea why somebody would want to do that. Francis was just an amazing person all around. Francis and I worked together. We hung out outside of work together. We would hang out with our kids.
Investigators learned that Francis had 2 daughters with an ex-boyfriend. The oldest is 5 years old, and the youngest is 3.
Our boyfriends actually were friends, and he brought her to my house one day, and that was like the beginning of a beautiful friendship. It felt like we've known each other for years. She's a wonderful, amazing mom, the best mom that I know. She was the best person I've ever met and known in my life.
She would do anything for anyone.
Frances and the father of her children broke up, but she still dreamed of getting married.
She always used to talk about her wedding and everything, and at this point, she didn't even have a boyfriend. She had everything planned out.
Dreams became reality in 2012 when she started dating 29-year-old Eric Wolf.
Eric was a divorced single father, 1 young child. He had primary custody over her.
2 years into the relationship, Eric and Frances moved in together. Despite working 2 jobs, Frances did all she could to make time for her children and Eric's daughter, too.
She was constantly doing things with her girls when she wasn't working, even with her stepdaughter. She was amazing.
Her days were long, but her life was full. Eric proposed, and the couple bought a house together.
Frances was very, very excited about getting married. Like, every day she was tagging me on Facebook or, like, sending me pictures. You know, she thought she was going to be living the life that she's always dreamt of having and having that fairy tale wedding.
But when detectives pressed Franny's friends, they learned that Eric had a dark side.
They told me that they weren't super fond of her fiance.
Because my daughter spent a lot of time with Frances. She was like a second mother to my daughter. And my daughter did tell me several times of Eric being kind of like a drill sergeant. He seemed real cocky. Just everything was about him and his daughter more so than Frances and her girls. I felt in my gut from the moment I found out that something happened to Frances, I felt like Eric had something to do with it. I didn't know what, I didn't know how, I didn't know why. I just felt like it was because of him that she's gone.
Police are determined to get to the bottom of Eric's suspicious behavior.
When we interview him, he stated when he saw her in the condition she was in, he did not call 911, and he didn't seem too upset about what had happened. At that point, he was somebody, definitely a person of interest in the homicide of Franny Craig.
Coming up, Eric's story gets stranger by the minute.
I didn't know if this was, like self-inflicted accident.
That's what we need to find out too.
A tiny clue reveals a big surprise.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
And when police find the killer, it shocks everyone.
I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now.
After calling 911 following the brutal murder of his fiancée, Frances Craig, Eric Wolf is questioned by police about how he discovered his fiancée's body.
I came home this morning because I work 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. I went upstairs, I checked both the girls' room before going in our bedroom.
Okay, so you came around to the foot of the bed and kind of looked to see where she was at.
That's exactly what I did.
Okay. Did you see anything on the mattress when you first came in?
I saw, I guess I might have saw that streak, but it didn't jump out like blood or anything.
Okay, so you saw something that just didn't jump out to you.
Yeah,
So this is bad.
Eric did not seem to register surprise, anger, hurt, anything that I think we all normally would want to see from a loved one when somebody is killed.
I thought maybe she had been drinking or something because she was in like almost like a funny position on the floor, which she doesn't drink hardly ever. I knew better than to wake her. I know from prior experience whenever I've woken her up, she's not a morning person and I get yelled at.
As the interview creeped close to an hour, Eric suggests a much darker reason for ignoring his fiancée sprawled out on the bedroom floor.
Up until just now, maybe since we've been here, I thought that if it wasn't an accident, then it was probably self-induced.
You mean suicide?
Yeah.
He indicated that he thought maybe she had committed suicide and just did not want to deal with it at that point. We found that being very odd and a red flag. Typically on a suicide, you'll find one stab wound or one gunshot wound. You won't find multiple stab wounds.
The prospect of Franny inflicting 90 stab wounds with her hands zip-tied sounds preposterous to the police. Even if it was physically possible, why wouldn't Eric have reacted with alarm?
So you didn't want to come to grips with it if she had done so, right? Because you don't want you.
To investigators, Eric's shifting story doesn't add up. Why would a woman everyone described as happy and carefree take her own life?
And the only reason I say self-induced is just because of how high-strung everything is right before this wedding, and
It's a lot of stress.
yeah.
Eric's strange comments could signal that he's traumatized over the death of his fiancée, or that he's hiding something. Determined to mine the truth, detectives decide to go right at their prime suspect.
Did you?
No.
Know what?
No, I didn't do this. I didn't know anything about it. I walked in, and I walked out, went to sleep, got up, went back in, and reported it.
But that brings me back to the questions we just asked. You made it at least halfway into that
I
bed.
did make it, and I admit that, and I'll admit that in front of whoever needs to hear it. But I want to make that perfectly clear that my stance on this is exactly what I said. I went in, for whatever reason it was, I didn't react.
Without forensic evidence to hold him, Eric is free to go, but investigators vow to keep their eye on him. And the deeper they look, the more circumstantial evidence starts to build up.
We did do a pretty thorough background, as we always do. And one thing we found out is that Eric did have a little bit of assaultive past with prior girlfriends and an ex-wife. It seems like he has some violent tendencies.
One of the strangest facts in this case is that Eric Wolf has a father who is serving a life sentence in prison for his own first-degree murder conviction.
He was convicted on a cold case homicide investigation in the 90s and was serving life in prison for murder. So that certainly put up a red flag to us.
Was it possible that violent tendencies run in the family? Even if they did, what possible reason would Eric have to want his fiancée dead?
The homicide occurred in August, and I believe their wedding was planned in September. We talked with her parents and her friends. They told me that Franny had second thoughts, and they were trying to convince her that if she was not prepared to get married, that maybe she should wait. And they also said Eric had second thoughts. Eric may have got cold feet, didn't want to get married, didn't know how to end the relationship.
While police work diligently to prove Eric's guilt, Francis's friends wait and wonder.
We didn't know what was going on. Nobody knew what was going on and what happened with Frances and how she was murdered. We just knew she was dead.
Behind the scenes, police work tirelessly. They obtain a search warrant to collect Francis's and Eric's electronics, but quickly realize that Francis's cell phone is missing.
We do find the cell phone near Franny's house. It had been thrown up against a tree and damaged. Again, we're thinking that the cell phone has some pretty valuable information.
The cellular phone data quite often can be some of the most compelling evidence.
We were able to get the phone records, and nothing really stuck out as being her, Franny communicating with anybody that would give us suspicion.
With no unusual cell phone activity or signs of forced entry on the day of the murder, police stay focused on Eric.
Eric Wolf at the time was at work, and investigators went and checked out, what they could to verify his alibi.
Police check the company's security cameras.
They do have one entrance. They do have a time card check-in, check-out system. We're able to verify he was at work, or allegedly at work, when the incident occurred. The problem with the system is there's some other exits that they're not supposed to use, but some of them have cameras, but other ones do not.
Was he able to leave his place of employment and get home to commit a murder and have all of that be undetected? Eric was the only person we could figure who would have any reason to want Franny dead.
Police investigating the homicide of 28-year-old Frances Craig cannot confirm her fiancé's alibi. Since not every exit at his workplace had a security camera.
We couldn't rule out that sometime during the night he left and then came back.
Eric's shaky alibi and suspicious behavior at the crime scene doesn't give police enough to arrest him, but it does leave them with a drastic course of action.
If you are operating in a murder investigation thinking that man killed his fiancée in the home where the children were, you are thinking we want to keep the children safe. We kept Eric's daughter from him while we tried to figure out what happened to Franny.
Both Eric's and Franny's daughters are removed from Eric's home and put in the custody of family members. With pressure mounting, detectives need to move fast to prove their theory, or find a more plausible one.
At that point, we try to determine any communication Franny may have been having with someone other than her fiancé.
Franny had an boyfriend. He no longer lived in the area, but he had returned to the area recently and had some level of connection or interaction with Franny.
The police press Franny's ex. Could he have committed this heinous crime?
That young man was a nice young man, came from a very, very nice family.
And he did have an alibi where he was at the time of the incident. We were able to verify that alibi, so we were able to eliminate him.
If no one in Frances's immediate circle wished her harm, what about her coworkers? Detectives learned that while Frances worked at a retail store, she was involved in a frightening incident.
Where Franny was working, there was a couple shoplifters that had stolen some clothing. She confronted them.
The confrontation turned to violence when the mother of the two young shoplifters jumped in, attacking Frances. The assault left Frances with a severe eye injury, as well as emotional scars.
The incident at work left Frances really scared, nervous, cautious.
The mother of the shoplifters was actually criminally charged for a crime for the assault, some type of unarmed robbery. She was convicted.
So there was some concern that maybe this was a retaliation for that situation.
We did surprise them with a visit. They did have alibis on where they would have been at that time that the incident occurred.
Investigators are able to verify those alibis, eliminating the women as suspects. Frustrated detectives are still hoping that DNA from the crime scene will help them find the killer. But while they wait for results from the crime lab, the people of Jackson attend Franny's funeral, their emotions raw from the news of her violent death.
Her mail carrier showed up to her funeral because she left such an impact on that person. That's how loved and how missed Frances Craig is.
This was definitely a shock to the community because we don't have that many homicides.
I was scared. I just didn't know what to expect.
I was afraid to leave the house. I was afraid to do anything because we still had no answers as to what happened.
The overwhelming feeling was the pressure we were under to get this right.
Determined to find justice for Franny, investigators continue to drill down on Frances's fiancé. Hoping for an inside look at Eric Wolf, they bring in one of the couple's former roommates.
Ryan Marshall was friends with Eric Wolf, so Eric and Franny welcomed Ryan into their home to stay with them.
His house had caught on fire, and she was trying to help a friend out.
He lived with them until April of 2014. The homicide happened August of 2014, so he had a pretty good knowledge of the two of them. He said everything was good, and he actually vouched for Eric, saying Eric was a really good guy and a friend for a long time, and doesn't feel that Eric would ever do anything to harm Franny.
Speaking with Ryan doesn't give police new reasons to suspect Eric, but it doesn't clear him either.
3 months in, we've pretty much eliminated everybody of interest, anyone close to Franny other than Eric. But we don't have enough evidence to present to the prosecutor.
But then, a new piece of information arrives that brings a new suspect into the spotlight.
There was DNA found on Franny's zip tie.
Three months after Frances Craig's murder, the lab results from the crime scene finally arrive. And they provide a huge break in the case.
were notified through a national index. The DNA located on the zip ties matched DNA in a database.
When somebody commits a felony, they have to submit to a DNA test. Somebody's DNA showed up on the zip ties that were used in the homicide. We get a name of Cortez Butler.
Who is Cortez Butler? Police waste no time looking into his criminal record.
We find out Cortez Butler served approximately 25 years for murder and was currently on parole in the Detroit area.
But we knew almost nothing else. We tried to determine if we could connect Cortez Butler to Franny Craig, to Eric Wolf, and we came up with nothing. We tried to determine if he had family locally, and we came up with nothing.
In fact, Cortez Butler appears to have no connection to Jackson whatsoever.
So we looked in our database to see if we have any Cortez Butlers in any police report we've done, any place in Jackson County, and we find none.
Then it was this mad scramble of, well, then how do we even tie Cortez Butler to this? For all we know, he may have worked at Home Depot, and his DNA may be on these zip ties for a completely innocent reason.
The investigators connected with Cortez's parole officer. They got Cortez's phone number. A search warrant was prepared and signed for Cortez Butler's phone records. We learned that Cortez Butler's phone was in Jackson on the early morning hours of August 10th, the actual time of the murder. The rest of those phone records almost exclusively placed it in and around the greater Detroit area, never in Jackson.
But what reason would Butler have to harm Franny?
Eric remained the prime suspect. He was the only dude with a motive.
Maybe Eric was not ready to get married and didn't know how to end a relationship.
So then the thought process was, did Eric hire this person to kill Franny?
The cell phone records also connect Butler to some other shady characters.
We were able to identify a Clifford and Rodney McKee as being connected to Cortez Butler. Clifford McKee lived in the Detroit area. Clifford McKee was in prison for approximately 20 years for murder. We found out that Rodney McKee, he was a big heroin dealer in Jackson. We found out that he had committed an arson.
The arson that Rodney McKee perpetrated was against Donna and Ryan Marshall.
The police are stunned. Ryan Marshall is Eric Wolf's friend. The one who had been welcomed into Franny and Eric's home after his house burned down. But what kind of a connection could Ryan possibly have to a drug dealer like Rodney McKee?
Ryan Marshall's mother had been a heroin dealer for Rodney McKee.
But after months of dealing for Rodney, Ryan's mother decided she wanted out.
Donna Marshall refused to sell heroin for Rodney McKee.
Rodney didn't like to be told no.
Ryan's mother, Donna, held her ground, but Rodney retaliated.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it.
Ryan witnessed it all. He then contacted police.
What was the connection between Eric Wolf, Cortez Butler, the Marshalls, and a drug dealer from Detroit? Detectives knew there was only one person who could answer the question, and soon they'd have a chance to ask him face to face.
Cortez Butler was arrested for yet another murder. Not Franny's murder, but another murder in the greater Detroit area.
We went down there in Detroit with one sole purpose: to gather information from Cortez Butler on what happened to Franny, and hopefully be able to explain to us what Eric's role in this whole thing was. But Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal.
It was clear that whatever Cortez was going to say, it was not going to be, quote unquote, on the record.
Investigators have DNA evidence and phone records that link convicted killer Cortez Butler to Francis Craig's murder. They arranged to talk to him while he's detained for an unrelated homicide. But he immediately tries to shut them down.
Cortez said he wasn't going to talk without any kind of a deal. I said, no one is giving you any kind of a deal without anyone knowing what you have to say.
Detectives press Butler hard until he finally agrees to talk. But only on one condition.
Cortez very pointedly and specifically asked repeatedly to not have the interview recorded.
If detectives agree not to record the interview, there's a chance Butler's testimony won't stand up in court. Still, with no other leads in the case, they decide to roll the dice.
We were there interviewing Cortez in the first place because we need to find out Eric Wolf's involvement in this. And it was dire that we did so as the children were about to go back with Eric Wolf. The whole idea for that was to keep these kids safe.
So the detectives tried to read him his rights. He didn't even want to be bothered with the rights. I know my rights. I think it was, bro, I know my rights, bro.
Butler wastes no time getting right to the point.
Cortez looked at me and said, "You have it all wrong." And I said, "Have what all wrong?" And he, at that time, let us know that Eric had absolutely nothing to do with this murder.
He goes, "I don't know this dude you're talking about, know nothing about him. Just trust me, he was not involved in this whatsoever."
The statement contradicts one of the investigators' strongest leads, but the next thing Butler says is even more explosive.
Cortez identifies himself as the killer. I remember thinking to myself, I'm glad we're sitting down right now, because I was almost in disbelief.
If Eric wasn't involved, why had this cold-blooded criminal murdered a woman to whom he had no obvious connection? It all went back to Rodney McKee's arson case.
Rodney McKee attempted to burn down a house with Ryan Marshall and his mother in it. Ryan Marshall was a key witness in his arson case.
He made some threats to Ryan that either he not agree to testify or he was going to be killed.
Cortez told us that he had been hired by Rodney McKee to kill Ryan Marshall.
First, Butler had to find Ryan, who was homeless because of the fire.
So we found out from Cortez Butler that they had bad information. They had information that Ryan Marshall was living with Francis Craig and Eric Wolf.
Cortez Butler entered Francis and Eric's house to kill someone who was no longer there.
Franny wasn't even the intended target. Franny was as innocent of a victim as anybody could ever be. When he opened the door, he had made the decision that he was killing somebody while he was there.
He doesn't have to force entry. He gets into the house. He noticed the bedrooms have some kids in it. He walks past them, and he goes to Franny Craig's room. When he gets to Franny Craig's room, he asks her where Ryan is. She said he's not there. Cortez tells Franny not to look at him. In his words, he stated she looked at him, so he had to kill her.
The horrific details that Cortez reveals next leave detectives with no doubt about the guilt of the man sitting across from them.
He decided to bind her, trying to get information from her, but she would not cooperate.
Cortez stabbed her multiple times.
We will never know how long he took to torture her and butcher her. And it clearly took time and effort to stab and slice her in the manner that he did. She died in the service of keeping Ryan's identity and his location secret, and/or she quite frankly just didn't know.
Cortez Butler's chilling confession is nothing short of a game changer, both for detectives and for Eric Wolf.
It eliminated our hypothesis that Eric Wolf was responsible for Franny's death.
Eric wasn't involved. He's an odd duck kind of guy.
Eric was able to regain custody of his daughter.
I took from this case that we can never jump to conclusions. I was pretty convinced that he did it. Not to the point that I could charge him, but I was pretty convinced I had the right person.
Now that investigators do have the right person, they're determined to put Cortez Butler away for life. But all of that is in jeopardy.
I didn't believe that Cortez's confession would be legally admissible in court because it wasn't recorded. And if Cortez Butler ever walked free again, I don't know that any of us are safe.
After months of dead ends, investigators finally have a confession from Francis Craig's killer. But prosecutors are concerned that his testimony may not hold up in court.
I was concerned that it would be legal. planning to use this in court against you. I was concerned that he had not been properly advised of his Miranda rights. But we still had his DNA on the zip ties and the cell phone records. So I kept thinking, and I finally got myself legally to a point where I was convinced that we need to give this a shot.
In October of 2015, Cortez Butler is charged with Francis's murder. When the trial begins 6 months later, Butler appears relaxed, almost giddy.
Cortez really seemed to thrive in that trial atmosphere. He would seek out cameras and smile at them, give them this big, full teeth smile.
He wanted to fight just because he could. He wanted to run the show just because he could.
But that's just a warm-up for the verbal assault he launches into when he takes the stand.
Cortez Butler was a monster at that trial. He bragged on how many bodies he had. It was unbearable.
Butler gleefully describes his murderous past in gory detail. But when asked about killing Francis, he fiercely denies it.
He clearly was so excited to say why he didn't commit this murder because he pleads to all of his murders, and he clearly didn't commit this one because he didn't plead to it.
Butler also denies ever confessing to police. But in a victory for prosecutors, the judge allows detectives to testify about Butler's confession.
We're able to get past that piece because he wasn't in custody for our case. He wasn't actually entitled to his Miranda warnings.
Eyewitness accounts play a major role in trying to move the jury, beginning with Eric's daughter, who found Franny dead.
Alexis was our first witness up there, and I don't know that I will ever forget the audible gasps and sobs and emotion pouring from the jury just from that first witness.
The physical evidence is laid out.
We have Cortez Butler's DNA on the zip ties that were used in the homicide, and we also have phone tracking information showing Cortez Butler and Jackson.
Prosecutors make a compelling case, but without a recording of Butler's confession. It's the detective's word against Butler's. When the jury returns with the verdict, there's no guarantee which way the cards will fall.
Cortez Butler was convicted of first-degree murder, and he won't ever walk free again.
The sentence was life without the possibility of parole for the premeditation murder of Franny Craig.
This was a complicated story to tell to a jury. It is a difficult one for all of us to wrap our brains around, even still.
Cortez goes to look for Ryan at her house, and he doesn't find him, and murders Franny in her own bed while she's doing nothing wrong.
Franny had no connection to her killer whatsoever. We can rest maybe a little easier that the bad guys won't ever hurt anybody else, at least not outside of the walls of prison. But none of it brings Franny back.
Today, Francis's two daughters live with their father. Those closest to Francis do everything they can to hold on to her memory.
Franny's family, I know, they've been lost ever since. I've been lost ever since Francis has been murdered.
I want people to remember how happy of a person she was, how generous, how nice and kind she was.
I miss Frances so much, and there's not a day that goes by that I do not think about her. I know that she's watching over everybody and making sure that everybody's good, because that's the type of person she was.
I wish I had known her, and I hope I honored her in my handling of this case.
For more information on an unexpected killer, go to oxygen.com.
Brand nigga from the 9-1. Switch that over, that's the young blonde. I was at the West Coast, now I'm in the East Coast. Shawty wanna